Welcome to lecture 17, where I'll be showing you what light filters are and how they can be used to make your renders and your lights look a lot more realistic and better. So the first thing which you will see is if you have a default area light, quad light or disc light or any other light, you have the option to add light filters to your lights. And let's just scale this up, which seems very hard to do currently. Snap scale is on, so let's scale up the light and maybe just shine it from top down and boost up the exposure maybe to 12, 15. Okay, so this is what we get. And in the bottom here you can see light filters, and you have a drop down menu and you can see which ones are available for this type of light. So you have a light decay and you have a light blocker. So let's just start with the light blocker, which should give us another node in my scene outliner, which is called transform. And if I move this guy up and scale it a bit bigger to make it visible, you can see on default this is just a cube. The default parameter is on a density on 0, which means it's not blocking any light. If I put the density back to 1, you can see nothing really happens in the renderer. But something changed. So when I move the box towards an object, let's say I move it down onto the dragon, you can actually see that this light filter is blocking the light. Hence the name blocker. So if I scale it up a bit more, not sure why it's giving me a bit of a trouble here. You can see now the bigger I scale it, the more it blocks the light from the dragon. If I move it down, you can see it also blocks the light on the floor on the left. So this is what a box light blocker does. You can connect different noise patterns to this. You can you can have a fall off. You can see at the bottom how it actually softens from left to right. You can change the direction from top to bottom or back and forth. You can play around with the axis. And then you have height edges to soften the edge in general. With edge, you can see now how it gets a lot softer. So this is something you should play around with. You can make the cube round edges, different things to play around with. And also in the type, you have box and you have plane, cylinder, and sphere. So an interesting one is plane actually, because this acts as a surface inside in the scene, so it actually casts kind of a shadow. So if I move this up, you can see it's kind of like a plane in the scene which blocks the light which is below it, which is very interesting and something which is used quite often on film sets or commercial sets and everything, where you need to have more control of your light. And even this works with a ramp, so I can make a softer fall off of the plane. And you can also plug in a texture to the density. Another interesting thing is if you change the mode back to box, you can actually plug in a shader, which is any kind of texture to this node. So if I go to my transform and I would plug in maybe a noise, or let's say let's just use an AI noise. And if I connect this up into the shader, we can also get interesting results. If I can find the attribute somewhere, let's just drag it into the shader. And if I play around with the scale, maybe we should see something happening. Oops, let's just change the scale a bit more. And you can see now that we get actually a volume pattern in this. And this is an interesting effect to create some clouds or some noise pattern inside of your lights. And you can see this is actually affecting the whole scene in general, and it's not just bound to the box. It's actually a global thing, which is very interesting and helpful if you have if you want to modulate clouds. You can animate the time to get a nice, like a moving pattern. You can see if I'm animating this, you get a very interesting effect. So this is what a shader connection is to the blocker. So let's head over to the light and try a different blocker. If I delete this, I'm not sure why the disconnect is not there, but if I just delete it, it should be fine as well. So now we have our clean light. And the next is a light decay, which is kind of a control to have a better or a more controlled fall off to the light. So if you would enable near attenuation, you can define start and end values for the near clipping. So let's say I put a value of 5. Oh, it's not really doing anything. So I need to go a bit bigger value. So a value of 50, you can see that there is like some kind of fall off to the top. And if I change my start value to, let's say 45, the light will only start illuminating from a distance of 45 to 50 units. And you can see there is like a softer fall off on the top there. And in most cases, this is used to control some artifacts like fireflies in the render. If the light source is very close to an object, you can see the effect help quite a bit. And you can really see the effect happening now when it's closer to the surface. Let's disable this and play around with the far attenuation, which is kind of the same thing. When you enable it, no light is emitted because the default values aren't 0. So this is kind of a way to say, hey, I want the light to only go 100 unit, and after that it should die off. You can as well specify a range. So if you would put the far start to maybe 80, it will only start falling off after 80 units. So this is something to control some lights. It will break physicality because lights are falling off quadratically, which is a more natural effect of lights. You can also get 2 other light filters if you use spotlights, and spotlights are based on your application. In Maya, you would create a spotlight in lights, create spotlight. And if I move this light up and maybe hide our area light, and go to the spotlight parameters and go to the Arnold tabs and boost up the exposure to maybe 10. You can see the spotlight is now lighting straight against the wall. If I move it down, you can see what it's doing. Let's boost up the exposure some more. And you can see now this is a typical spotlight. You can play around with the penumbra angles to make it softer, or all these kind of things. And interestingly, the spotlight has a few more. It has a gobo and it has a barn door. So let's first start with the barn door, which is the name is coming from the film set. They used to put it some metal things in front of lights to control where you want to see shadows and not. So if I go there, you have lots of controls to specify or control where the shadows should be blocked or the light should be blocked. So let's just play around with this top left slider, move this in, and you can see this is now blocking the light. You can play around with the top right edge. You can move it in and out, soften it out. And then you have for each edge of the spotlight, you can control the softness and how far it goes into your light. This is very nice if you want to really block stuff. And then you can also soften out the edge to get a softer fall off. So this would be a barn door blocker or light filter. And another interesting one is if we head back to my shape, disconnect the barn door and go to the add function and add the gobo. A gobo is kind of something they also use on the film set where they put something in front of a light source to create like a leaf pattern or some interesting pattern to get a nicer shadows onto your object. So let's connect a slide map to this gobo. Let's just try to connect a simple noise pattern to this as well. So if I frame this in here, you have the gobo, and if I create just a noise pattern and connect the out color to the slide map, let's see what we get. Currently not so much because the noise is very broad, so let's just increase the scale maybe to 20. And you can see what we get right from the bat. It looks like it's actually affecting the whole scene, but it's actually coming from the spotlight. So if I move the spotlight, the gobo should move as well. You can see the pattern is there and the light is moving around it. Very interesting. And you can also enable volume shading again to get a better sense what's actually happening. So if I would go to environment, volume, and enable my fog again, maybe a value a bit stronger, you can see now what we get. We get this nice little pattern. You can also plug in any texture like leaves or any other attribute. So let's just load in an AI image node and just choose a very interesting shape here. So let's go to source images and just connect the gobo blinds like this texture and just connect this guy up to my slide map instead. So now you can see what's going on here. With this image connected, you can see that you get these nice shadow lines just from the texture we connected. You can control and offset the texture using the parameters in the gobo shader. You can scale it up, you can scale it down, lots of things to play around with. And the density is just affecting how strong it affects the light. So if it's on 1, it actually blocks all the light, and then you can play around with the image itself. You have different methods. You can add more lights. You can use it as an additive mode. You can subtract it from the light, and different things to play around with. The most common one is the blend one, which is blending these two together. You can also use mixing. You can try subtracting it. As I said, the most common one would be the blend mode. Yeah, and you can see on the object now you get these nice looking effects. Like it's a really cool effect on the dragon. It's like a nice pattern on it. So if I move the light away from the wall, you can see now what these nice shapes you get, these nice lines, something very more natural than a flat constant light source. So we will definitely work a lot more with light filters, and I hope this lecture showed you how to use it, what the benefits are, and how to assign this to your lights.